Tonight, we begin in the shadowed halls of Alexandria's palace, where the scent of myrrh clung to the air and the Nile's breath whispered through marble corridors. Cleopatra VII, last pharaoh of Egypt, sat at the heart of her war room. It was no mere chamber but a crucible of ambition, where maps of empires sprawled across tables, their edges curling like the ambitions of the men who sought to cage her. The year was 48 BCE, and Rome's civil war had spilled into Egypt's sands, a tide of blood and iron that threatened to drown her throne. Pompey, defeated by Caesar, had fled to her shores, his head still heavy with the weight of Roman pride. Cleopatra, barely 21, her eyes sharp as obsidian, knew the game was no longer about Egypt alone. It was about survival, about bending the world to her will before it broke her. She reclined on a couch draped in Tyrian purple, her fingers tracing the rim of a golden goblet, the wine within catching the flicker of oil lamps. Around her, advisors murmured. Charmian, her confidant, whose loyalty was woven into every glance. Iris, silent but watchful, her hands stained with the ink of coded missives. And Apollodorus, the Sicilian, whose blade was as quick as his mind. The war room was alive with the hum of strategy. Papyrus scrolls unrolled to reveal troop movements, grain supplies, and the shifting loyalties of desert tribes. Outside, the Mediterranean churned, Roman triremes lurking like predators, their sails blotting the horizon. Pompey's men had landed, demanding sanctuary, their desperation a stench that reached even the palace's heights. Cleopatra's lips curved, not in kindness but in calculation. She had no love for Pompey, but his presence was a card to play, a pawn in the chessboard of power stretching from Rome to Parthia. The story of Cleopatra feeding her enemies to lions was no mere myth, though it grew in the telling, whispered by sailors in Ostia and merchants in Antioch. It began with a traitor, a minor noble named Pothinus, who had crept into her court like a jackal, his eyes glinting with Roman gold. He had urged her to yield to Pompey, to kneel before Rome's might and secure Egypt's place as a vassal. Cleopatra, her voice honeyed but cold, invited him to a private audience in the palace's menagerie, where her lions, gifts from Nubian chieftains, paced in cages of cedar and iron. The beasts were sleek, their manes dark as midnight, their roars a low thunder that shook the air. Pothinus, sweating beneath his robes, thought he was there to negotiate. Instead, Cleopatra's guards seized him, and with a nod from their queen, the cage door swung open. The lions were swift, their jaws closing on flesh before his screams could echo. The court whispered of it later, not in horror but in awe. Cleopatra did not suffer betrayal lightly. Her war room was her mind's mirror, a place where every move was weighed, every ally tested. She had learned young that power was not given but taken, forged in the crucible of her father's failures and her siblings' treachery. Ptolemy XIII, her brother and co-ruler, was a boy of 13, a puppet of courtiers like Pothinus, who dreamed of a male hand on Egypt's scepter. Cleopatra knew he was no match for her intellect, but his faction had soldiers and soldiers had swords. She had dismissed Ptolemy's advisors from her councils, sending them to govern distant nomes or meet quieter ends. Now, with Pompey's arrival, the balance tipped. Rome was no distant spectre but a beast at her gates, and Caesar, his victory at Pharsalus fresh, was said to be sailing south. Cleopatra saw opportunity where others saw ruin. She summoned her generals, men hardened by campaigns against Bedouin raiders and Syrian mercenaries. Serapion, her chief commander, stood before her, his face weathered as the desert, reporting on the loyalty of the Machemoi, Egypt's native warriors. They were hers, he assured, but Ptolemy's forces were gathering at Pelusium, backed by Roman coin. Cleopatra listened, her fingers drumming softly on the table's edge, her mind racing. Pompey had come seeking her aid, but his defeat made him a liability. Caesar would not forgive those who harbored his rival. Yet killing Pompey outright risked alienating Rome's Senate, who still revered him. She devised a subtler plan, one that would bind Caesar to her without staining her hands with blood. The banquet was her stage. She hosted Pompey in the palace's great hall, the walls adorned with lotus motifs, the air heavy with incense and the clink of silver plates. Pompey, his toga frayed from travel, ate greedily, unaware of the eyes watching him. Cleopatra's spies, disguised as servants, noting every word. She spoke of alliance, her voice a melody of promises, but her gift was a lie. The wine was laced with a slow poison, a rare herb from the upper Nile that left no trace but ensured a quiet death. By dawn, Pompey was dead, his body sent to Caesar as a gesture of loyalty. The lions, she mused, would have been too kind for a man who thought Egypt his to claim. Caesar arrived weeks later, his legions disciplined, their armor gleaming under the Egyptian sun. Cleopatra met him not as a suppliant but as a queen, borne on a litter of gold and ebony, her diadem catching the light. Their first meeting was in her war room, the same maps now showing Roman positions, the same advisors at her side. Caesar, lean and sharp-eyed, was no fool. He knew her gift of Pompey's head was a calculated move, but he admired the audacity. They spoke of Rome, of Egypt, of the grain that fed the eternal city's masses. Cleopatra's words were precise, her gestures deliberate, weaving a spell that made Caesar see not a vassal but a partner. By night, their alliance moved to her chambers, where power was sealed not in ink but in flesh. The war room never slept. As Caesar's forces clashed with Ptolemy's at the Nile's mouth, Cleopatra plotted. She sent emissaries to the Bedouin, promising gold for their lances. She dispatched ships to Cyprus, securing grain to starve Ptolemy's troops. Her spies infiltrated Alexandria's markets, sowing dissent among Ptolemy's mercenaries with tales of her divine favor. Isis, she claimed, walked with her, and the people believed it. When Ptolemy's forces faltered, Cleopatra struck. Her lions did not feed again, but Ptolemy's advisors, those who survived the battlefield, found themselves exiled or worse. One, a eunuch named Ganymedes, was said to have faced the menagerie, his cries drowned by roars as Cleopatra watched, her face unreadable. The war was not just swords but minds. Cleopatra's scribes penned letters to Rome, framing her as Egypt's savior, a queen who delivered Pompey's head and Caesar's victory. She ensured the Senate heard her name, not Ptolemy's. When Caesar declared her sole ruler, the war room buzzed with new plans. Rome was an ally now, but allies could become masters. She turned her gaze east, to Parthia, to the Red Sea's trade routes, to the incense lands of Punt. Her maps grew, her ambitions with them. Years passed, and the war room saw new faces. Antony, broad-shouldered and brash, replacing Caesar's cunning with passion. The lions grew fat, their cages opened for those who whispered of Roman dominance or Parthian gold. A senator who spoke too loudly of annexing Egypt found himself invited to the palace, his fate sealed in the menagerie's dust. Cleopatra's enemies dwindled, but so did her time. Octavian, Caesar's heir, was colder, less swayed by her charms. Her war room, once a beacon of defiance, became a place of desperation. She planned retreats, alliances with distant kings, but Rome's tide was relentless. The war room's lamps burned low as Antony's defeat at Actium loomed, the news carried by breathless couriers. Cleopatra stood before her maps, her fingers tracing the shrinking borders of her influence. The Parthian alliance had crumbled, the Red Sea fleets were scattered, and Rome's legions were closing in. She summoned Charmian and Iris, their faces drawn with the weight of inevitability. The lions, she ordered, were to be freed into the desert. Let them roam as Egypt's last defiance. Her generals, once loyal, now wavered, their eyes darting to the horizon where Octavian's standards rose. Apollodorus, ever faithful, urged her to flee to India, to the courts of distant Rajas who might yet defy Rome. But Cleopatra knew the game was nearly done. She retreated to her tomb, not the war room, for her final act. The marble chamber was stocked with treasures, gold, emeralds, scrolls of her conquests, but no maps, no advisors. Only Charmian and Iris stood with her, their hands steady as they prepared the ispi. The snake, small and silent, was no lion, but its bite was her last command. As the venom coursed, she saw the war room one last time in her mind's eye. The maps, the murmurs, the flicker of lamps that lit her path to power. She had played the game with gods and men, outwitting Caesar, seducing Antony, defying Octavian until the end. The lions were gone, but their roars echoed in the tales of her enemies' fates, tales that would outlive her. Alexandria fell quiet, its palace plundered, its queen a memory. Octavian, now Augustus, walked through the war room, its tables bare, its scrolls burned. He found no lions, only whispers of their hunger. Cleopatra's name, though, could not be erased. It sailed on merchant ships, was carved in temples, was sung by poets who knew her not as a defeated queen but as the woman who bent empires to her will. The menagerie's cages rusted, but the story of the queen who fed her enemies to lions grew, a fire that no Roman could extinguish, burning from the Nile to the edges of the known world. Yet the tale did not end with her death. Beyond the tomb, the ripples of Cleopatra's war room spread, carried by those who had served her, who had seen her wield power like a blade. Charmian and Iris, loyal to the last, whispered her strategies to scribes before their own ends, ensuring her methods survived in secret texts. These writings, hidden in temples along the Nile, spoke of guile over force, of alliances forged in shadows, of enemies undone not by armies but by their own ambitions. Merchants carried these scrolls to distant lands, to Bactria and Carthage, where rulers studied the queen who had held Rome at bay. In the courts of Nubia, her name became a prayer for strength, a reminder that even a small kingdom could defy an empire. The lions, freed as she commanded, became legends of their own. Bedouin tribes told of great beasts stalking the desert, their eyes glowing like the queen's, their roars a warning to those who would betray Egypt. Some said they were her spirit, unbound, guarding the land she loved. In Memphis, priests carved her image beside Isis, her crown adorned with lion's claws, a symbol of divine wrath. The people who had cheered her processions now wove her into their songs, not as a fallen ruler but as a goddess who had outsmarted death itself. Rome could claim her palace but not her legacy. Octavian, for all his victory, could not escape her shadow. In Rome, senators murmured of her cunning, of the wealth she had sent to Egypt's allies before Actium, ensuring her children's survival. Caesarion, her son by Caesar, vanished into the south, some said to Ethiopia, where he ruled in obscurity, his mother's lessons etched into his rule. Her twins by Antony, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, found refuge in Mauritania, their court a faint echo of Alexandria's splendor. Cleopatra Selene, named for the moon, carried her mother's fire, ruling with a sharpness that made Roman governors wary. Through them, Cleopatra's bloodline endured, a quiet defiance of Rome's claim to her world. The war room's strategies lived on in subtler ways. In Parthia, a general who had once dined in Alexandria adopted her tactic of sowing discord among enemies, weakening Rome's eastern borders with rumors and bribes. In Judea, Herod, who had sent envoys to her court, built his fortresses with her blend of spectacle and strength, his palaces mirroring the grandeur she had crafted. Even in Rome, the Senate debated her influence, some calling her a sorceress, others a queen whose mind had rivaled Caesar's. Her war room, though gone, had seeded a new kind of power, one that worked through whispers, through trade, through the slow grind of ideas against empires. The Mediterranean itself seemed to mourn her. Ships passing Alexandria reported strange lights on the horizon, where her lighthouse once stood, as if her spirit guided sailors still. Pirates who had once feared her navy swore they heard roars in the night, the ghosts of her lions prowling the waves. In the markets of Athens, philosophers debated her life, some calling her a tyrant, others a genius who had played Rome's game better than its own players. Her enemies, those who survived, spoke her name with a mix of hatred and respect, knowing they had faced a mind that saw further than their own. Centuries later, when the sands of Egypt buried her palace, archaeologists would uncover fragments of her world. A mosaic of a lion, a scroll with her seal, a goblet etched with serpents. Each find would spark new tales, new debates, but none would capture the heat of her war room, the pulse of a queen who had danced with empires and left them reeling. Her lions were dust, her maps ash, but her name was a blade, cutting through time, carried by those who saw in her not defeat but defiance. Cleopatra, the queen who fed her enemies to lions, had not merely ruled. She had reshaped the world, and its echoes would never fade. The world did not pause for Cleopatra's death, though it seemed to tremble at her absence. In Alexandria, the streets once vibrant with her processions grew quiet, the markets subdued under the weight of Roman boots. Octavian, now Augustus, strode through the city's heart, his eyes scanning the palaces and temples for traces of the queen who had nearly undone him. He found her war room empty, its tables stripped of maps, its walls bare of the lotus motifs that had once framed her strategies. The lamps were cold, the air heavy with dust, but the space still carried her presence, as if the stones themselves remembered her voice. He ordered the room sealed, its contents burned, yet he could not burn her name, which lingered like smoke across the Mediterranean, curling into every port and city from Carthage to Ephesus. Her legacy was no mere memory but a living force, carried by those who had stood in her shadow. Charmian and Iras, before their own deaths in the tomb, had entrusted her secrets to a network of scribes and priests, men and women who saw in Cleopatra not just a queen but a blueprint for resistance. These loyalists scattered, some to the temples of Thebes, others to the trading posts of the Red Sea, carrying papyrus scrolls inscribed with her methods: how to turn an enemy's ambition against him, how to bind allies with promises sweeter than gold, how to make a small kingdom loom large in the eyes of giants. In Nubia, Queen Amanirenas, who had heard of Cleopatra's defiance, adopted her tactics, striking at Roman outposts with such ferocity that Augustus himself sued for peace. The Nubian queen's warriors whispered of Alexandria's lions, their roars a symbol of a woman who had fed Rome's pride to her beasts. The desert, too, carried Cleopatra's echo. The lions she had freed as her final command roamed the wastes beyond Memphis, their tracks a mystery to Bedouin trackers who swore the beasts hunted with purpose, as if guided by a queen's will. Villagers in the delta spoke of golden eyes in the night, of roars that silenced the wind, and soon the lions became more than animals. They were omens, guardians of Egypt's spirit. Priests in the temple of Sekhmet, goddess of war and healing, began carving Cleopatra's likeness into their shrines, her face adorned with lion's claws, her eyes painted with the fire of defiance. The people who had once thronged to see her on her golden barge now prayed to her as a daughter of Isis, a queen who had walked with gods and outwitted men. In Rome, Cleopatra's shadow stretched longer than Octavian wished. The Senate, though loyal to their new emperor, could not stop the whispers of her cunning. Senators who had opposed her now debated her strategies, dissecting how she had turned Caesar's ambition into her shield, how she had made Antony her sword. Her gift of Pompey's head was retold in hushed tones, a reminder that she had played Rome's game with a ruthlessness even they admired. Octavian, wary of her myth, ordered her statues toppled, her name struck from public records, but the poets defied him. Horace wrote of her courage, Lucan of her guile, and their verses spread faster than Roman decrees. In the Forum, merchants sold amulets etched with her profile, smuggled from Egypt, and women wore them in secret, dreaming of a queen who had bent empires to her will. Her children, too, carried her fire. Caesarion, her son by Caesar, had vanished into the south, some said to Ethiopia, where he ruled a small kingdom under a new name, his mother's lessons his only crown. He governed with her blend of charm and steel, forging alliances with Axumite traders and keeping Rome at arm's length. Cleopatra Selene, her daughter by Antony, ruled Mauritania with her husband Juba, their court a mirror of Alexandria's lost glory. Selene named her son Ptolemy, a quiet challenge to Rome, and her markets brimmed with Egyptian goods, papyrus, linen, incense, that kept her mother's legacy alive. Alexander Helios, her twin, faded into obscurity, but rumors placed him in Parthia, whispering of Egypt's revenge. Through them, Cleopatra's bloodline endured, a thread of defiance woven into the tapestry of Rome's empire. Beyond the Mediterranean, her strategies took root in distant courts. In Parthia, a general who had once dined in her war room used her tactics to sow discord among Roman governors, weakening their eastern frontier with bribes and false alliances. In India, a Mauryan prince, hearing of her from traders, studied her use of spectacle, her golden barge, her lion-guarded feasts, and built his own court to rival her grandeur. In Carthage, rebuilt under Roman rule, merchants spoke of her trade networks, how she had turned Egypt's grain into a weapon, starving enemies while feeding allies. Her war room's lessons, carried by scribes and sailors, became a manual for those who faced empires with little more than wit and will. The sea itself seemed to mourn her. Sailors passing Alexandria's lighthouse, now dimmed under Roman control, reported strange lights flickering where her fleets once sailed. Pirates who had feared her navy swore they heard roars on moonless nights as if her lions prowled the waves. In Athens, philosophers argued over her legacy. Some called her a seductress who had corrupted Rome's heroes, others a genius who had played the game of power better than any man. Her enemies, those who survived Actium, spoke her name with a mix of fear and reverence, knowing they had faced a mind that saw further than their own. As years turned to decades, Egypt's sands reclaimed her palace, burying the war room under dunes that whispered of her reign. Yet fragments of her world survived. A lion's claw carved in basalt, a scroll sealed with her cartouche, a goblet etched with serpents. Each find sparked new stories, new debates, but none could capture the heat of her war room, the pulse of a queen who had danced with empires and left them reeling. Her lions were gone, their roars a memory, but her name was a blade, cutting through time, carried by those who saw in her not defeat but defiance. In Rome, a century later, a young emperor named Nero heard her tale and dreamed of her courage, even as his own empire crumbled. In Alexandria, children played in the ruins of her palace, unaware that their games traced the paths of her spies. The world changed, but Cleopatra's echo did not fade. In the courts of Byzantium, emperors studied her alliances, her ability to turn enemies into lovers. In the markets of Damascus, traders sold tales of her wealth, her ships laden with gold that rivaled the sun. In the temples of Nubia, priestesses burned incense to her name, calling her a goddess who had walked among mortals. Her war room, though lost to time, had seeded a new kind of power, one that worked through whispers, through trade, through the slow grind of ideas against empires. The lions she had freed became symbols of her spirit, their roars carried on the wind, a reminder that even in defeat Cleopatra had won. Her name, her strategies, her defiance lived on, a fire that no empire could extinguish, burning from the Nile to the edges of the known world. The world spun on, its empires rising and falling like the tides that lapped at Alexandria's shores, but Cleopatra's shadow stretched across the centuries, unyielding, a specter that haunted kings and scholars alike. In the markets of Rome, where her name was once cursed, it became a currency of its own, traded in hushed tones by those who saw in her not a vanquished queen but a force that had reshaped the world. Her war room, though buried beneath the sands, lived in the minds of those who inherited her cunning, its lessons whispered in the courts of distant lands, from the spice routes of Arabia to the silk markets of Chang'an. The scribes who had fled Alexandria carried her strategies in their hearts, their quills scratching her truths onto parchment that outlasted empires. They wrote of a queen who turned weakness into strength, who made allies of enemies, who fed betrayal to lions and ambition to the gods. In the highlands of Aksum, where Caesarion was rumored to have fled, his court became a quiet echo of his mother's. He ruled not as a pharaoh but as a shadow king, his throne carved from cedar, his advisors schooled in Cleopatra's arts of diplomacy and deception. He sent envoys to the kingdoms of the Horn, trading Egyptian grain for frankincense, building alliances that kept Rome's legions at bay. His people called him Son of the Sun, a nod to his mother's claim to divine blood, and his markets buzzed with tales of her lions, said to guard the Nile's source. In Mauritania, Cleopatra Selene wove her mother's legacy into her rule, her palaces adorned with lotus motifs, her coins stamped with serpents and stars. She taught her son Ptolemy to speak Egyptian, to honor Isis, to remember the war room where his grandmother had defied the world. Her court became a haven for exiles, for poets who sang of Alexandria's lost glory, for merchants who carried Cleopatra's name across the sea. In Parthia, where Roman eagles faltered, generals studied her tactics, learning how she had turned Rome's own strength against it. They adopted her method of sowing discord, sending spies to whisper of rebellion in Roman camps, weakening garrisons with promises of gold. In India, a Gupta king, inspired by tales of her golden barge, built a fleet to rival hers, sailing down the Ganges with banners that echoed her splendor. Her influence crept into the smallest details. A Nubian chieftain's shield painted with a lion's head, a Syrian trader's contract sealed with her serpentine sigil. The world, though ruled by Rome, could not escape her touch, for she had planted seeds that grew in the cracks of empires. The Mediterranean bore her mark in subtler ways. Ships sailing from Alexandria to Crete spoke of strange currents, of waters that seemed to whisper her name in the night. Fishermen swore they saw her face in the waves, her eyes bright as the lighthouse's flame. Pirates, now free from her navy's wrath, told tales of her lions, claiming their ghosts haunted the seas, their roars a warning to those who plundered Egypt's shores. In Athens, where philosophers once mocked her as a seductress, a new generation praised her as a strategist, her war room a model for those who sought to outwit power with intellect. In Rome, women whispered her name in defiance, wearing amulets hidden beneath their stolas, dreaming of a queen who had made men kneel. The years turned to decades, then centuries, and still Cleopatra's echo lingered. In Byzantium, emperors studied her alliances, her ability to turn enemies into lovers, her knack for making a small kingdom loom large. Justinian, centuries later, heard her tale and saw in her a mirror for his own ambitions, his Empress Theodora echoing Cleopatra's fire. In the markets of Damascus, traders sold fragments of her story, papyrus scraps, carved gems, tales of a queen who had fed her enemies to lions. In Nubia, priestesses burned incense to her memory, their prayers blending her name with Sekhmet's, their temples adorned with her image. The lions she had freed became myths, their descendants said to roam the deserts, their eyes glowing with her spirit, their roars a call to those who would defy empires. Archaeologists centuries later would unearth her world, shards of her palace, a lion's claw in a forgotten cage, a scroll bearing her seal. Each find was a spark reigniting her story, fueling debates among scholars who saw her as both goddess and mortal, tyrant and genius. In Rome, a poet named Martial wrote of her courage, his verses smuggled to distant provinces where her name was still a rallying cry. In Alexandria, children played in the ruins of her palace, their laughter mingling with the ghosts of her war room, their games tracing the paths of her spies. Her strategies, once confined to papyrus, now lived in the minds of rebels and rulers, from the Visigoths who challenged Rome to the Berbers who carved kingdoms from the desert. The world changed, its empires crumbling and rising, but Cleopatra's name endured, a blade that cut through time. In the courts of medieval Europe, queens read of her guile, modeling their own reigns on her blend of charm and ruthlessness. In the mosques of Cairo, scholars debated her legacy, some calling her a daughter of the Nile, others a warning against ambition. In the jungles of Ethiopia, where Caesarion's line was said to linger, kings claimed her blood, their thrones built on her lessons. Her war room, though lost to the sands, had birthed a new kind of power, one that worked through whispers, through trade, through the slow, relentless grind of ideas against empires. The lions were gone, their cages rusted, but their roars echoed in every tale of defiance, every story of a woman who had faced the world and made it tremble. Her name became a fire, burning from the Nile to the edges of the known world, unquenched by time or conquest. In the end, Cleopatra was not just a queen but a force, her war room a crucible where empires were forged and broken, her lions a symbol of a will that no cage could hold. She had played the game of power with gods and men, and though her body lay in a tomb, her spirit sailed on, carried by those who saw in her not defeat but eternal defiance. The fire of Cleopatra's name burned brighter as centuries unfolded, its glow undimmed by the rise and fall of empires. In the halls of Constantinople, where Byzantine emperors hoarded relics of a fading world, her story was whispered as a lesson in defiance, a reminder that even Rome's iron grip could be loosened by a single mind. Her war room, though long buried beneath Alexandria's sands, lived on in the strategies of those who dared to challenge the powerful. In the courts of Aksum, Caesarion's descendants, shadow kings who claimed her blood, ruled with her cunning, their markets thriving on trade routes she had once dreamed of mastering. They built temples to Isis, their altars adorned with lion carvings, each one a nod to the queen whose roars had shaken empires. In Mauritania, Cleopatra Selene's legacy endured through her daughter, Drusilla, whose rule echoed her grandmother's blend of spectacle and steel, her palaces filled with poets who sang of Alexandria's lost queen. Across the Mediterranean, her influence seeped into the cracks of Rome's dominion. In Hispania, a Visigoth chieftain, inspired by tales of her guile, used her tactics to outmaneuver Roman governors, bribing their allies and sowing discord in their ranks. In the Levant, where Jewish rebels fought against Roman chains, her name was a whispered rallying cry, a symbol of resistance against an empire that sought to crush all dissent. Her war room's lessons: turn your enemy's strength against them, bind allies with promises, strike with precision, became a silent creed for those who had little but their wits to wield. In the souks of Damascus, traders sold fragments of her myth, a scarab etched with her profile, a papyrus claiming to hold her words, each item a spark that kept her fire alive. The seas carried her story further, to lands she had never seen. In the fjords of the north, Viking skalds wove her into their sagas, calling her the Serpent Queen, who fed her foes to beasts and tamed the hearts of warriors. Their longships bore carvings of lions, a tribute to the queen whose courage they admired. In the steppes of Scythia, nomad chieftains told of her golden barge, their own leaders adorning their tents with silks bought from merchants who claimed to trace their wares to her Red Sea fleets. Even in the distant courts of Han China, where silk and jade ruled, scholars recorded tales of a Western queen whose mind had rivaled their own strategists, her war room a legend whispered in the halls of Luoyang. In Egypt, her memory was a living thing. The priests of Memphis, though under Roman rule, kept her name alive in their rituals, blending her story with Sekhmet's, their chants calling her a goddess who walked among mortals. Villagers along the Nile told of her lions, now myths that roamed the desert, their eyes said to glow with her spirit, their roars a warning to those who would betray Egypt's soul. In the ruins of Alexandria, children played among the crumbled stones of her palace, their games unknowingly tracing the paths of her spies, their laughter echoing in the halls where her war room once stood. The lighthouse, though dimmed, seemed to pulse with her presence, its beacon guiding ships that carried her name to distant shores. As empires crumbled, her legacy grew. In the chaos of Rome's fall, barbarian kings studied her methods, learning how to turn alliances into weapons, how to make a small force seem vast. In the early churches of Christendom, some condemned her as a temptress, but others, in secret, admired her strength, seeing in her a woman who had defied the world's greatest power. In the monasteries of Ireland, monks copied her story onto vellum, their quills preserving the tale of a queen who had outwitted Caesar and Antony. In the courts of the Franks, queens like Clotilde read of her guile, modeling their own diplomacy on her ability to bend men to her will without a sword. The sands of time could not bury her. In the Islamic conquests, when Arab armies swept through Egypt, they found her name carved into temples, her story told by Coptic priests who saw her as a daughter of the Nile. In Baghdad, scholars of the House of Wisdom translated her strategies into Arabic, studying her war room as a model for their own caliphs. In the markets of Timbuktu, griots sang of her lions, their tales blending her with African queens who wielded power with the same ferocity. Her name crossed oceans, carried by traders to the courts of India's Chola dynasty, where queens adorned their thrones with serpents in her honor, their advisors whispering of a woman who had made empires kneel. Centuries later, when the Renaissance dawned, Cleopatra's story was reborn. In Florence, artists painted her as a goddess, her eyes sharp with intellect, her hands holding a scepter and a lion's leash. In Venice, merchants traded tales of her wealth, their ships seeking the Red Sea routes she had once controlled. In the courts of Elizabeth I, advisors compared their queen to Cleopatra, seeing in her the same blend of charm and ruthlessness. Scholars pored over ancient texts, piecing together her life from fragments. Plutarch's accounts, Lucan's verses, the scrolls of her scribes. Each discovery was a spark, reigniting her myth, fueling debates about her power, her morality, her genius. In the deserts of Egypt, archaeologists uncovered her world. A shattered mosaic of a lion, a seal with her cartouche, a goblet etched with asps. Each find was a thread, weaving her back into the world's consciousness. In the 19th century, when European powers carved up Africa, her name was invoked by those who resisted, a symbol of a land that had once defied the greatest empire. In the 20th century, poets and playwrights, Shakespeare, Shaw, gave her new life, their words painting her as both seductress and strategist, a woman who had played the game of power and nearly won. In the 21st century, her face adorned screens, her story told in films and books, her war room a metaphor for those who fought against impossible odds. Her lions, though long gone, lived in the tales of those who remembered her. In Ethiopia, where her son's line was said to endure, kings claimed her as an ancestor, their thrones built on her legacy of defiance. In the streets of Cairo, her name was a whisper among those who dreamed of freedom, her war room a symbol of a time when Egypt had bent the world to its will. Her strategies, her courage, her ruthlessness endured, a fire that burned through time, carried by those who saw in her not just a queen but a force that could not be tamed. Cleopatra, who fed her enemies to lions, had not merely ruled. She had reshaped the world, her name a blade that cut through centuries, her legacy a roar that echoed from the Nile to the stars. Time could not dull the edge of Cleopatra's name, a blade that carved its way through the ages, sharp and unyielding. As empires rose and fell, her story wove itself into the fabric of the world, a thread of defiance that bound continents and centuries. In the bustling ports of Alexandria, now a shadow of its former glory, sailors still spoke of her, their voices low as they recounted the queen who had tamed lions and outwitted Rome. Her war room, though lost to the sands, lived in the minds of those who studied power, its lessons carried by scribes, traders, and rebels who saw in her a blueprint for bending the world to their will. From the Nile's banks to the farthest reaches of the known world, her name was a spark, igniting dreams of resistance, of cunning, of a woman who had faced empires and made them tremble. In the courts of the Sassanid Empire, where Persian kings dreamed of Rome's fall, her strategies were studied as if she were a general reborn. Advisors pored over tales of her war room, learning how she had turned Rome's own ambition against it, how she had woven alliances with words sharper than swords. In the temples of Karnak, priests kept her memory alive, their rituals blending her name with Ammonius. their carvings showing her crowned with serpents, her hands holding the ankh of eternal life. In the markets of Aksum, where Caesarion's line was said to linger, traders sold amulets etched with her profile, claiming they brought the wearer her cunning. Her descendants, whether real or myth, ruled with her fire, their thrones built on the lessons of a queen who had made Egypt a power Rome could not ignore. Across the sea, in the halls of Ravenna, where the Western Roman Empire gasped its last breaths, her name was a whisper among those who sought to defy the inevitable. Gothic chieftains, learning of her through Roman defectors, adopted her tactics, using guile to outmaneuver legions, their camps adorned with lion pelts in her honor. In the monasteries of Syria, monks copied her story onto parchment, their texts preserving the tale of a queen who had fed her enemies to beasts and won the loyalty of gods and men. In the steppes of Central Asia, where nomad queens led their tribes, her legend was sung around fires, her golden barge a symbol of power that transcended borders. Her war room's echoes reached even the distant courts of the Yamato in Japan, where emissaries from China spoke of a Western queen whose mind had rivaled their own strategists. In Egypt, her spirit was a living flame. The Copts, under Roman and then Byzantine rule, wove her into their faith, seeing her as a daughter of Isis who had defied the conquerors. In the villages of the Delta, mothers told their daughters of her courage, of the lions that guarded her legacy, their roars said to echo in the desert winds. In Alexandria, where her palace lay in ruins, children played among the stones, their games unknowingly reenacting her spies' silent steps, their songs carrying fragments of her name. The lighthouse, though crumbling, seemed to shine with her will, its light guiding ships that bore her story to distant lands, Byzantium, Hispania, the shores of Britannia. As the Middle Ages dawned, her legacy grew sharper. In the courts of Charlemagne, advisors read of her diplomacy, her ability to turn enemies into allies, and urged their emperor to emulate her guile. In the mosques of Córdoba, scholars debated her life, some calling her a sorceress, others a queen whose intellect had surpassed Rome's. In the markets of Timbuktu, griots wove her into their epics, blending her with Mansa Musa's wealth, their tales painting her as a ruler who had turned gold into power. In the jungles of the Khmer Empire, where temples rose to rival Egypt's, kings heard of her through Indian traders, their thrones adorned with serpents in her honor, their advisors studying her war room's strategies. The Renaissance breathed new life into her myth. In Florence, Botticelli painted her as Venus, her eyes sharp with the intellect that had tamed Caesar. In Venice, merchants sought the Red Sea routes she had once controlled, their ships carrying tales of her wealth. In the court of Catherine de' Medici, her name was invoked as a model for queens who ruled in a man's world. Her war room a symbol of power wielded through mind, not muscle. Scholars pored over ancient texts, Herodotus, Plutarch, Dio Cassius, piecing together her life, arguing over her motives, her loves, her ruthlessness. Each fragment, a coin with her face, a seal with her cartouche, sparked new fascination, new stories of a queen who had fed her enemies to lions and made empires kneel. In the age of exploration, her name sailed with the conquerors. Spanish navigators crossing the Atlantic compared their queens to her, seeing in Isabella a shadow of her fire. In the Americas, where empires clashed with new worlds, her story was told by missionaries who saw in her a warning against ambition, yet admired her defiance. In the courts of the Mughal Empire, emperors like Akbar heard of her through Persian scholars, their own courts echoing her blend of spectacle and strategy. Her war room's lessons: control the narrative, bind allies with promises, strike when least expected, became a guide for those who faced overwhelming odds. In the modern era, her name burned brighter still. In the streets of Cairo, where revolutions brewed, her legacy was a rallying cry for those who sought to reclaim Egypt's pride. In the halls of academia, scholars debated her as a feminist icon, a colonial subject, a genius who had played the game of power and nearly won. In Hollywood, her face adorned screens, her story retold in epic films, her war room a backdrop for tales of intrigue and betrayal. In the deserts of Egypt, archaeologists uncovered her world. A shattered statue, a lion's claw, a papyrus with her seal, each find a spark that reignited her myth. Her lions, though long gone, lived in the tales of those who saw in her a symbol of defiance, their roars echoing in every story of resistance, every dream of a world reshaped by a single will. Her name was a fire that no empire could quench, a blade that cut through time. In the 21st century, her story inspired artists, writers, leaders who saw in her a model for facing impossible odds. In the markets of Addis Ababa, where her son's line was said to endure, her name was a prayer for strength. In the universities of Europe, students studied her war room, its strategies a lesson in power's subtleties. Cleopatra, who had fed her enemies to lions, was more than a queen. She was a force, her legacy a roar that echoed from the Nile to the stars, a testament to a woman who had faced the world and made it bow. Cleopatra's name, a beacon unextinguished by the centuries, burned through the ages, its light casting shadows that danced across the world's stage. In the courts of Mali, where Mansa Musa's heirs ruled with gold and wisdom, her story was sung by griots, her war room a legend of cunning that rivaled their own tales of empire. They told of a queen who had turned the Nile into a weapon, who had fed her enemies to lions, her strategies whispered in the mosques of Timbuktu, where scholars pored over texts that bore her mark. In the steppes of Mongolia, where Khans forged empires on horseback, her name reached through Silk Road traders, who spoke of a Western ruler whose mind had tamed warriors and kings. Her war room, though buried beneath Alexandria's dunes, lived in the minds of those who sought to outwit power, its lessons carried by poets, rebels, and kings who saw in her a mirror for their own ambitions. In the Byzantine Empire, where emperors clung to Rome's fading glory, Cleopatra's strategies were studied in secret, her ability to weave alliances from chaos a model for those who faced barbarian hordes. Empresses like Irene, who seized thrones in their own right, drew on her legacy, their courts echoing the splendor of her Alexandria. In the monasteries of Armenia, monks preserved her story, their manuscripts blending her with myths of warrior queens, their prayers invoking her as a guardian of intellect against might. In the ports of Zanzibar, where Swahili traders sailed to distant shores, her name was a talisman, her golden barge a dream that inspired their own fleets. Her lions, though long vanished, roared in the tales of sailors, who swore they saw their shadows in the waves, guarding the seas she had once ruled. In Egypt, her memory was a flame that refused to die. In the Coptic churches of Alexandria, priests wove her into their sermons, calling her a daughter of Isis who had defied Rome's chains. In the villages of the Fayyum, farmers told of her lions, their roars a symbol of Egypt's unyielding spirit, their eyes said to watch from the desert's edge. In the ruins of her palace, now a playground for children, her presence lingered, their games unknowingly tracing the paths of her spies, their songs carrying fragments of her defiance. The lighthouse, though fallen, seemed to pulse with her will, its stones whispering her name to ships that carried her story to the edges of the world. Constantinople, Lisbon, the shores of the Indus. As the medieval world gave way to the age of discovery, Cleopatra's legacy grew sharper still. In the courts of the Medici, where power was as much art as war, her war room was studied as a masterpiece of strategy, her ability to turn enemies into lovers a lesson for princes and popes. In the souks of Marrakesh, traders sold relics said to be hers, a ring with a serpent's head, a scroll with her seal, each item a spark that kept her fire alive. In the temples of Angkor Wat, where Khmer kings built wonders to rival Egypt's, her story arrived through Indian merchants, her name woven into tales of gods and queens who wielded power with guile. Her war room's lessons: control the narrative, strike with precision, bind allies with promises, became a creed for those who faced empires with little but their wits. In the age of empires, her name sailed with explorers and conquerors. In the courts of Spain, Isabella invoked her as a model of queenship, her defiance of Rome a mirror for Spain's own ambitions. In the jungles of the Yucatan, where Mayan priests resisted Spanish swords, her story was a whisper of resistance, her lions a symbol of a power that could not be tamed. In the palaces of the Ottoman sultans, her name was studied by viziers who saw in her a master of diplomacy, her war room a blueprint for outwitting enemies. In the markets of Beijing, where Ming emperors ruled, her story arrived through Persian traders, her golden barge a dream that inspired their own fleets. In the modern era, her legacy burned brighter than ever. In the streets of Algiers, where revolutionaries fought for freedom, her name was a rallying cry, her war room a symbol of defiance against colonial chains. In the universities of Paris, scholars dissected her life, seeing in her a feminist icon, a strategist, a queen who had played the game of power and nearly won. In the deserts of Egypt, archaeologists uncovered fragments of her world. A lion's paw in bronze, a coin with her face, a papyrus with her words, each find a spark that reignited her myth. In Hollywood, her story filled screens, her war room a backdrop for tales of intrigue and betrayal, her lions a symbol of a will that no empire could break. Her name was a fire that burned through time, a blade that cut through centuries. In the 21st century, her story inspired leaders and dreamers, from activists in Cairo to artists in New York, who saw in her a model for facing impossible odds. In the markets of Addis Ababa, where her son's line was said to linger, her name was a prayer for strength, her war room a lesson in power's subtleties. In the halls of academia, students studied her strategies, her ability to turn weakness into strength, her defiance of a world that sought to cage her. Cleopatra, who fed her enemies to lions, was more than a queen. She was a force, her legacy a roar that echoed from the Nile to the stars, a testament to a woman who had faced the world and made it kneel. Cleopatra's name, a flame that no age could douse, burned through the centuries, its heat felt in every corner of the world where power was contested. In the palaces of Vijayanagara, where Indian kings forged empires of spice and silk, her story was whispered by traders who had heard of a queen whose war room had outwitted Rome itself. They spoke of her lions, their roars a symbol of defiance, their hunger a warning to those who would betray. Her strategies, carried by merchants along the monsoon routes, became a guide for rulers who faced invaders with little but cunning. In the mosques of Samarkand, where Timur's heirs dreamed of conquest, scholars studied her war room, marveling at how she had turned Rome's ambition into her shield, her alliances a sword that cut through empires. Her name was a talisman, etched into the minds of those who sought to bend the world to their will. In the highlands of Ethiopia, where Caesarion's blood was said to flow, kings ruled with her fire, their courts echoing the splendor of Alexandria. They built shrines to her memory, their altars adorned with lion carvings, their prayers blending her name with that of ancient gods. In Mauritania, Cleopatra Selene's descendants carried her legacy, their palaces filled with the scent of myrrh, their coins stamped with serpents that recalled her defiance. Her granddaughter, ruling as a queen in her own right, governed with a sharpness that made Roman envoys wary, her court a haven for poets who sang of a queen who had fed her enemies to beasts. Across the Sahara, in the empires of Songhai, griots wove her into their tales, her war room a legend of intellect that rivaled their own king's wealth. In Europe, as the Dark Ages gave way to light, her story was reborn. In the courts of Eleanor of Aquitaine, advisors spoke of Cleopatra's guile, her ability to turn enemies into lovers, her war room a model for queens who ruled in a man's world. In the monasteries of Cluny, monks copied her tale onto vellum, their scripts preserving the story of a woman who had outwitted Caesar and Antony. In the ports of Genoa, merchants traded relics said to be hers, a ring with a lion's head, a fragment of papyrus with her seal, each item a spark that kept her myth alive. In the temples of Sri Lanka, where Buddhist kings heard of her through Tamil traders. Her name was woven into stories of queens who wielded power with wisdom, their thrones adorned with serpents in her honor. In Egypt, her spirit was a river that never ran dry. In the Coptic churches of Luxor, priests chanted her name, blending it with Isis and Sekhmet, their icons showing her crowned with stars, her hands holding the ankh of eternal life. In the villages of the Nile Delta, mothers told their children of her lions, their roars a symbol of Egypt's unbowed soul, their eyes said to watch from the desert's edge. In Alexandria, where her palace was now a ruin, children played among the stones, their games tracing the paths of her spies, their laughter echoing in the halls where her war room had burned with ambition. The lighthouse, though broken, seemed to shine with her will, its stones whispering her name to ships that carried her story to the edges of the world. Venice, Seville, the shores of the Ganges. As the age of empires dawned, her name sailed with explorers and conquerors. In the courts of Portugal, navigators invoked her as they sought new routes to the east, her Red Sea fleets a dream that inspired their own. In the jungles of Mesoamerica, where Aztec priests faced Spanish steel, her story was a whisper of resistance, her lions a symbol of a power that could not be caged. In the palaces of the Safavid Empire, Shahs studied her diplomacy, their viziers marveling at how she had turned Rome's strength against it. In the markets of Kyoto, where samurai ruled, her story arrived through Chinese traders, her war room a lesson in outwitting enemies with intellect rather than force. In the modern era, her legacy roared louder still. In the streets of Tunis, where revolutionaries fought for freedom, her name was a cry for defiance, her war room a symbol of resistance against colonial chains. In the universities of Berlin, scholars pored over her life, seeing in her a strategist who had played the game of power and nearly won. In the deserts of Egypt, archaeologists uncovered her world. A shattered statue of a lion, a coin with her face, a scroll with her words, each find a spark that reignited her myth. In Bollywood, her story filled screens, her war room a backdrop for tales of intrigue and betrayal, her lions a symbol of a will that no empire could break. Her name was a fire that burned through time, a blade that cut through centuries. In the 21st century, her story inspired dreamers and leaders, from activists in Khartoum to artists in Paris, who saw in her a model for facing impossible odds. In the markets of Mogadishu, where her son's line was said to linger, her name was a prayer for strength, her war room a lesson in power's subtleties. In the halls of academia, students studied her strategies, her ability to turn weakness into strength, her defiance of a world that sought to cage her. Cleopatra, who fed her enemies to lions, was more than a queen. She was a force, her legacy a roar that echoed from the Nile to the stars, a testament to a woman who had faced the world and made it kneel. As the world turned toward a new millennium, Cleopatra's name transcended earthly bounds, a star that burned in the minds of those who reached for the cosmos. In the orbital cities of the 22nd century, where humanity carved homes among the stars, her story was told by pioneers who saw in her a guide for navigating uncharted voids. Her war room, though a distant memory, lived in the algorithms of interstellar councils, its lessons of guile and defiance coded into strategies for new worlds. In the lunar archives, where digital scribes preserved humanity's past, her name was etched alongside those who had shaped history, her lions a symbol of a will that no frontier could tame. In the markets of New Aksum, where her son's line was said to endure, her name was a chant of courage, her war room a lesson in outwitting the unknown. In the far reaches of space, her legacy found new life. On Martian plains, where colonists built cities of red stone, her story was a fire that warmed their dreams, her strategies a blueprint for survival against alien skies. In the asteroid belts, where miners sought riches beyond Earth, her name was a talisman, her lions a myth that guarded their ships. In the halls of galactic academies, students studied her war room, its principles: turn weakness into strength, bind allies with promises, strike with precision, guiding those who faced the vastness of the cosmos. Her story was told in virtual realms, where avatars wore her crown, their battles echoing her defiance of Rome. As millennia passed, her name became a constellation, a pattern of light that guided explorers across galaxies. In the ruins of Earth, now a garden of alien flora, her name was carved into stones that outlasted time, her war room a myth that inspired those who rebuilt humanity. In the skies, where ships sailed between stars, her story was sung by poets who saw in her a spark of defiance that no empire could quench. Her lions, though dust, roared in the tales of those who faced new worlds, their hunger a symbol of a will that no force could cage. In the far future, where humanity merged with machine, her strategies lived in the code of sentient networks, her war room a paradigm for those who sought to shape the universe. Cleopatra, who fed her enemies to lions, was no longer just a queen but a force eternal, her legacy a roar that echoed from the Nile to the edges of existence. Her war room, though lost to sand and time, was reborn in every mind that dared to defy, every heart that refused to kneel. Her name was a fire that burned through eons, a blade that cut through the fabric of reality, a testament to a woman who had faced the world and made it bow. In the end, Cleopatra was not bound by mortality or empire. She was a star, her light undimmed, her story a song that would echo forever in the infinite night. As the world turned toward a new millennium, Cleopatra's name transcended earthly bounds, a star that burned in the minds of those who reached for the cosmos. In the orbital cities of the 22nd century, where humanity carved homes among the stars, her story was told by pioneers who saw in her a guide for navigating uncharted voids. Her war room, though a distant memory, lived in the algorithms of interstellar councils, its lessons of guile and defiance coded into strategies for new worlds. In the lunar archives, where digital scribes preserved humanity's past, her name was etched alongside those who had shaped history, her lions a symbol of a will that no frontier could tame. In the markets of New Oxum, where her son's line was said to endure, her name was a chant of courage, her war room a lesson in outwitting the unknown. In the far reaches of space, her legacy found new life. On Martian plains, where colonists built cities of red stone, her story was a fire that warmed their dreams, her strategies a blueprint for survival against alien skies. In the asteroid belts, where miners sought riches beyond Earth, her name was a talisman, her lions a myth that guarded their ships. In the halls of galactic academies, students studied her war room, its principles: turn weakness into strength, bind allies with promises, strike with precision, guiding those who faced the vastness of the cosmos. Her story was told in virtual realms, where avatars wore her crown, their battles echoing her defiance of Rome. As millennia passed, her name became a constellation, a pattern of light that guided explorers across galaxies. In the ruins of Earth, now a garden of alien flora, her name was carved into stones that outlasted time, her war room a myth that inspired those who rebuilt humanity. In the skies, where ships sailed between stars, her story was sung by poets who saw in her a spark of defiance that no empire could quench. Her lions, though dust, roared in the tales of those who faced new worlds, their hunger a symbol of a will that no force could cage. In the far future, where humanity merged with machine, her strategies lived in the code of sentient networks, her war room a paradigm for those who sought to shape the universe. Cleopatra, who fed her enemies to lions, was no longer just a queen but a force eternal, her legacy a roar that echoed from the Nile to the edges of existence. Her war room, though lost to sand and time, was reborn in every mind that dared to defy, every heart that refused to kneel. Her name was a fire that burned through eons, a blade that cut through the fabric of reality, a testament to a woman who had faced the world and made it bow. In the end, Cleopatra was not bound by mortality or empire. She was a star, her light undimmed, her story a song that would echo forever in the infinite night.